Kia ora everyone, and welcome back to Stripped and Unscripted. I'm Vixen Temple,
And I am Madeline Rose.
and we are very excited today because we have our first ever guest on the podcast. Kia ora, this is my very good friend, one of the founders of the Latin Cuirs, who she will briefly tell you more about, producer, visual artist, graphic designer. This is my friend Lilith, and I will pass over to you to introduce yourself some more.
Thank you. My name is Lilith. As Vixen said, I am an illustrator, graphic designer. I started Latin Cuirs with my friend Belen. What else do I do? I produce shows with Latin Cuirs. I write now. And yeah, I think that's pretty much what I do. I'm just a creative with ADHD, essentially.
Tell us about the Latin quiz.
So Latin Queers is a group or collective or an organization, um, in which is essentially we're trying to build spaces through art, um, for people who are queer and Latin American to meet. But as we have, hosted events and stuff, it has kind of also expanded to other communities, even though everything has a Latin American lens, because obviously the two people who started it, Belen and myself, were Latin American. I'm from Mexico. And when I came to New Zealand, was really the first time I was able to be open and carefree in regards to my identity, be it gender or sexuality, just because in Mexico it wasn't really something that was at the top of my mind because other more pressing things were happening. It was more survival based than it is here. So once I was here, I was like, oh, this is great. I'll go to queer events. And I went, and it was mainly white people who would fetishize me. I was like, I don't like this. And then I would go to Latino spaces, and they tended to be pretty homophobic and transphobic. And I was also like, ooh, this is not what I want. And through a mutual friend, I met Belen, and we connected so quickly because we both, back in our countries, used to do work around sexuality. I was a sexual health promoter, for example. And we just started talking from there, and we both have this very big drive for social justice, and we just connected very well. And as usual, we would just complain about how white queer spaces were and how macho, homophobic, transphobic Latino spaces were until we were just like, you know what? Fuck it. Let's do our own thing because this is not working. I need other people to hang out with. So that's how Latin Queers came about. Our first Latin Queers event was literally at Belen's house watching a movie, and we just invited a bunch of queer Latinos. And that was how it started. And then now, 3 years later, in March, we're going to host a cabaret masquerade where Vixen will be emceeing. Um, and yeah, things are just much bigger now than just watching movies in our living room.
Yeah, I've really watched you guys grow a lot over the years. It's been an honor to be in community with you guys and to be a part of that growth, even in just a small way by being an attendee. I was booked to perform at, was it Body Decolonization and what was the name of the event?
It was called Body Pleasure Decolonization at Valhalla.
That's the one. I was booked. I did my sex metal Barbie, stripping is not consent, pro stripper justice act, burlesque. It was really fun. And I remember being in that space and feeling, just so euphoric and so free and liberated. And it was actually, I did notice the difference between a space like that versus predominantly very white queer spaces. And I'm going to ask you a question about that shortly, but also the erotic poetry nights that you guys host have been incredible. I wrote an article about my experience in that I'll link in the show notes. But what do you think the link between whiteness and how it shows up in queer spaces versus, within the conversation of decolonizing the body? Like, what is it about white queer spaces that just feels so off for you that you're trying to mend, if that makes any sense?
Um, so what I see is what one of our mutual friends, Aisha, calls the colonial stiffness. That's what they have named it. And it's essentially that, from my observations, I feel a lot of white people don't feel they belong anywhere. In the same time, people of color have culture, if it makes any sense. Like a lot of white people are like, oh, I don't have a culture because they've been so far removed from it. Um, and so because they don't have that, they might not be used to engaging in a deeper way with people, or just engaging at all. I feel like there's a lot of these stiffness and a lot of these, um, I really want to make friends, but I also don't know how to do it without like being super nervous, and I don't know if I'm going to say the right thing. Like there's a lot of that nervousness. And when there isn't that nervousness, there's a lot of audacity in which I feel like a lot of white people see other communities as they would as they would see someone in a Natural Geographic documentary, in which you know they exist, you kind of know what they like and whatever, but you're still far removed. You still don't know how to approach. You're almost scared to do it. And within that audacity, like if we're watching a documentary, you're just treating us like a documentary or something like that. You're gonna say, "Oh, I know everything there is to know about you." So there's also a lot of that audacity of like, I know exactly what you go through. I read so much about intersectionality. Um, there's also a lot of people who want to tell you about your own experience. And yeah, there's just a lot of, it's very weird. It's a very big mixture of discomfort with knowing that you probably hold privilege over people around you, but you haven't done the work to actually be able to see what that is day by day. You can say, oh yeah, pay equity, or oh, how someone said a racial slur to someone, but they cannot identify it in their day-to-day life, how white supremacy is helping them.
Yeah, I like absolutely agree with this like cultural stiffness thing. I think Pakeha New Zealand is it's like alongside the what is it? Alongside the audacity, it's like a lot of elitism. Like
Mm,
I feel like I notice a lot of like it's like this like really intense social hierarchy here in Aotearoa, especially like in the Pakeha communities. Like even outside of the queer spaces, when I was way more in the normie spaces, like yeah, the elitism of all of it is like so deeply like I find it quite disturbing and quite honestly quite repulsive. But um in relation to what you said about feeling fetishized in white queer spaces, I was wondering if do you find that you are a lot more fetishized in the white queer spaces than the Latin spaces that you were in, if that makes sense, like vice versa? Like fetishized, obviously, for being POC as opposed to being queer. Because, again, like white spaces in New Zealand, this audacity of like, I know I can kind of like remember a few situations that I had like witnessed in the club of women who weren't necessarily white or were white, sorry, not white, weren't necessarily POC, saying some really crazy fetishizy sort of things to other women, regardless of the fact that we were all strippers, and you would hope that having like an experience like that would make you maybe a little bit more informed on what fetishization is and kind of how to navigate that. But obviously that's so not the case.
So the thing is, the way that I look, in Latino spaces, the way that I look, which is fat and brown skin, and I'm not like, oh, I'm so happy that I left Mexico. I don't have like that hatred from or when I come from. Because of all of that, I don't think I get fetishized at all in Latino spaces, just because it is very male gazy, and I do not fit that at all. But in queer white spaces here it's been a very interesting experience because while when I was in Mexico, I was just another bitch, like just another person. Um, Here in New Zealand, my features and the way that I look is just seen as attractive, way more than where I'm from. And so that has come with these expectation from a lot of, especially white people, in which I am sexually available, especially because I talk so much about human sexuality and sex siren and
Mm,
all of these things. A lot of white people think that I'm sexually available to them, or think that what happens a lot is that I get a lot of flattery. Well, they think it's flattery, but it's also just
yeah.
racism.
Mm,
That's what I get the most. I don't usually get to like intense things, like things that would seem very insulting outright, but there is a lot of things that people say that they think it's a compliment that isn't. I also get a lot of, with the rise of Latin American music, people know that I'm Latin and then they would randomly say things in Spanish. They would randomly sing stuff in
mm,
Spanish to me. And I never know how to react to that. And it's like, and that's the type of also fetishization as well, because it's like, I don't know what you want me to do. It almost feels like it's like, perform for me, monkey, perform, speak in Spanish.
you would like really it makes me like a little bit. I mean, it doesn't actually make me shocked at all, but you would definitely hope that people that have experienced in other marginalized spaces would have an understanding or an awareness of fetishization, but
Mm.
obviously that is so not the case in so many spaces, and that it just speaks even more to that like white audacity that you initially brought up of like, because I can imagine the exact situation of people screaming at you about being hot. It's like not actually. It's really quite frustrating, to be honest. Like when people start, it's objectifying. Yes, 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 yeah. It's like, whoa, it's so aggressive the way you're yelling at me about how I look right now. And obviously, I don't have any real. I look like just another bitch here in New Zealand, like I'm Pākehā presenting. But I just remember the way that some people would yell at girls in the club and just be thinking like, far out, like it's so audacious and entitled because they're expecting you to like react really positively to that.
Yes, it's very strange to have that expectation placed upon me by people who I literally have never seen before in my life, or people who have only seen me online. It's very strange. Yeah, to have people want me to act a certain way, like I don't know your name. Why are you shouting at me?
Mm. It makes me think about how there's a lot of similarities here to like whorephobia, and how a huge component of whorephobia is xenophobia, and this like fear of cultures that in your eye you see as like foreign. So living in a very white supremacist world where white people are the default and the norm, there's this tendency for eroticize queer people of color, and there's been this huge history of the fetishization through, I mean, that's a huge part of colonialism, is like dehumanizing people of color through eroticizing them and fetishizing them in a way that's very colonial. Whereas being your friend, Lilith, like, you are a very erotic, sensual person. One thing we bond over a lot is our fascination of like sex and the psychology of sex, and politics and the politics of pleasure and everything. So how do you feel about going about navigating, like, you are a sexual, sensual person, but it's not because you're from Mexico, and it's not in the way that white people would view you as being this like erotic, otherworldly, like, oh, she's so foreign, and like the word, I'm going to say it, exotic.
I would say it's a combination of things for me. in which up until recently, you know this, Vixen, I've been very, very sick the last few years. I have not been able to work, etc. And part of that was having a lot of mental fog. I can see just how much it made everything so difficult. Um, and so when I think back on the last few years, it was definitely a bit difficult to be able to walk the world knowing that I was being perceived like that, while also not being used to it and not being able to like use my brain much without noticing myself, to be able to navigate that. So it was definitely it has been tumultuous, like to the point that up to like a year ago, I was in a relationship with someone who fetishized me a lot, and I couldn't see it. It was very difficult for me to see, but like typical that you start opening up to your friends and they're like, "What the fuck?" And it was until then that I really noticed just how deep this person was fetishizing me and not seeing me as a person. But at the same time, I feel like since I was very young, I've been very connected to my sensual side, and I've never been one to understand social norms very well or hierarchies. And because of that, I think I show myself in a way that other people don't do because they understand these social hierarchies and expectations. So I think a lot of the time, the sensuality and stuff that I have, it is true to me, but I don't know that I would show it as easily if it wasn't because one, I have a very supportive system around me, and two, because I just don't understand social norms.
When me and Lilith were like becoming friends, like, let me know if you want me to edit this out, Lilith, but one of the things we bonded over were we were like, yeah, we've been masturbating since we were like 5 years old. Like,
Yes.
and I think Lilith and I talk a lot about similarities of being on the spectrum and how that's made us just like, so, yeah, just, we're just so we're not trying to fit into this mold of what society says, women should look like and behave like. And we, I think, are both very proud of our sensuality and our sexuality and the way that we embody it to reject patriarchy and colonial ideologies around how women should behave. And that makes me think about how when we were hanging out recently, you were explaining to me, talking about like the colonization of the body. Do you remember that?
Yes, yes, okay, I remember now. So, okay, so there's this theory called body territory, which was developed by indigenous women in Abya Yala. Abya Yala is what you know as Latin America. And yeah, essentially, I think this is very common for a lot of indigenous groups around the world in which you see your body as an extension of the territory you're in and your body as your territory. And so I think that what I was saying at that point is that because we are trained to not be present in our body, like how many people do you know that just dissociate all the time? Is that we don't notice stuff. Like it's the typical thing of like someone gets very sick all of a sudden. Um, but oftentimes it's not all of a sudden. Oftentimes there have been signs um, there have been signs that something might be up, but we're so used to ignoring that and we stay in our heads that then it just kind of explodes into an illness sometimes, into maybe an injury or whatever it might be. I think that when you're trained to ignore what your body needs to thrive, it is way easier to manipulate people because you're not gonna know better. And even if you feel in your body that something is not right, you still might go along with it because you've been trained to think that you think with your brain, not with your body, and you make decisions with your brain, not with your body.
I think it kind of like it feels like it ties back quite well to our episode on people pleasing and conflict avoidance. Yeah, it's this I mean, I can only speak for Aotearoa because I've only lived here, but we are so like the culture here, we are so willing to like breach our own boundaries in order to like keep the peace and keep comfort or whatever it is. And I guess it's exactly that. It's this like lack of like respect for like what's best for oneself in a way. Like, does that kind of make sense?
Sorry. No, yeah, I was just saying that it does make sense because in people pleasing, sometimes you might feel that your body is like, I don't want to do this, but you want to seem friendly and la la la, and so you do something that your body's telling you, I'm very uncomfortable with this.
Yeah, absolutely.
And especially like you touched on how that's a very indigenous way of looking at things. I see that in my own Māori whakapapa about how we believe that everything possesses waiora, mana, everything has spirit to it, and we are nature. We live with nature. It's this very colonial mindset of of separating ourselves from our bodies and looking at nature as an object to colonize. I was going to say colonialize, to colonize. It's very patriarchal it's just this look of like things are something to be possessed instead of we live in alignment with one another. I think that's why I enjoy being a sex worker so much, and why I view it as, like, I view myself as a healer, is that especially in my full service practice, I am encouraging people to come into their bodies. And a lot of my clients are men, and at the start of my bookings I talk about my boundaries and I ask them what theirs are, and a lot of the time they don't know because they've actually never had someone ask them before, like, what are you comfortable with me doing to you? I think we've raised men to believe that they're just these inherently like sexual fiends that like just crave sex and will do anything. But like, when you sit down with a man and say to him, like, what do you want me to do with you in this session, and what are you not comfortable with? They don't know how to answer that because they've never considered that before. They've always just gone with the flow. And I think it's something that I even see with my woman clients or my genderqueer clients, where it's like they've never been asked before, what are you not comfortable with me doing? I'm not going to just go in. Like, for me, I'd rather like ask permission than forgiveness. Like, I think sex work and pleasure politics and decolonizing the body are so inherently tied together.
As I was listening to you, I was like, yeah, like men are a very good example in which a lot of men are taught that it's about brute force, but not about what their feelings say, because that's gay. Especially because a lot of people, a lot of people, when they hear these things of like, we're part of nature, blah, 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 they're like, what is this bullshit? Because they think about it as, oh, I'm part of nature, as in I am an tree that happens to be in this territory. Whereas if you see a tree and you see underneath, there's the mycelium that connects everything. And I think about it more like that. It's a continuation. It's not just a part of your body. It's a continuation of the territory.
I am tangata whenua, I have whakapapa, but my family lost a lot of our tikanga tradition in my grandmother's generation. In Aotearoa, that was sort of a generation where it was like the loss of tikanga was almost sort of like forced upon people, and not really any generations after her, I guess my mum's generation, had really tried to reclaim that. So I was brought up very Pākehā, and it's been very much up to me to kind of relearn, yeah, I guess like the Māori worldview and things like that. And it really it makes the Pākehā vision of that sort of thing just looks so, like what you said earlier about stiffness, like that word specifically resonated a lot. It feels very apt for all of this thing. It's like this like stiff clinical vibe to it. But yeah, just my 2 cents.
So, Lilith, with a lot of the events that you host and produce and cultivate through the Latin Cuirs, there is, not every single event, but there does seem to be, well, actually, I don't know, there does seem to be this overarching core theme about pleasure politics. Do you want to discuss what pleasure politics is and what it means to you, and why it is so important for the Latin Cuirs to have that focus in your events? Because it's just so beautiful.
So yes, all of our events do try to touch on pleasure politics because I think it's inevitable. Um, so a lot of the activism in Latin America reivindicates pleasure, not as something sinful or something bad, but as something that guides us. It's definitely something that I don't see much here, but in Latin America, well, we go through a lot of things. For example, living in Mexico, um, every day I would send a picture of myself when I would go out to my brother and my friend because I didn't know if that day I would come back home so they would need an updated picture of what I look like in case they had to search for me. So, there's stuff like that that is very intense that we have to deal with and process, even though sometimes we don't process it. Sorry, my cat is moving. Okay, there we go. So that we have to process. And so within that, the way that we see it is like it's because the system wants us to feel like shit. Because the system wants us to be struggling for money, to be struggling for safety, etc., etc. Because if you are just feeling like shit, if you are just struggling, you're not going to raise your voice about anything bad that happens, or it's more difficult for you to advocate for yourself. So that's why we reivindicate pleasure a lot because we think that that pleasure can be a guide to know if what you're doing aligns with you or not. Now, when people think about if they hear about oh yeah pleasure politics and all of this, first thing they think and first thing I've been told is excess, orgies, all the drugs, and it's like okay, um, I think that a very important part of pleasure politics and pleasure in general is, for example, if we look at this view of excess, let me see if I can explain it in a cohesive way. This is something that you can find discussed in the book Pleasure Activism um, by Adrienne Marie Brown, I think is their name. Um, and they say, for example, that when you overindulge, and overindulging is different, the amount is different for everyone. But when you overindulge with something, you actually start to be disconnected from your body. What do I mean by this? If, for example, I do drugs or I eat a lot, let's do that food thing because I think more people can relate to that. Um, if I eat, I'm enjoying it, this is delicious, whatever, but if then I start to eat way too much until my body feels sick, or just because I feel like I have to eat everything that is on my plate, then I'm being disconnected with my body because I am not aware that my body's telling me like stop, stop, stop. Like there's so many people who every single time they eat, every single time they're like, oh, I ate too much. And to me, that is just a little way in which we can see how it started, yeah, with pleasure. It started with, oh, this is delicious. But then in engaging into this excess, you ignore that your body's telling you like, bitch, I'm gonna vomit if you continue, which is essentially what people with, for example, how do you call this in English? Yes, like binging, for example. So there's that part in which people think, oh, pleasure exists. No, because once we get to that point, we start to actually disconnect. Same with drugs. If you do too many drugs, it comes to a point in which you don't know what's happening. You're just consuming them to not feel the world, to not understand the world around you. There's many reasons why people do that, but sometimes it can be out of self-harm rather than liberation. Also, something that we think is very important in social justice is to not see it as a martyr job. Like a lot of people think, oh, if you're an activist, you have to do everything for free. You have to be available to the community 24/7, even in your own personal time, even when you're out and about with your friends. All the time you have to be on when that's not true because that just replicates the same capitalist logic of work and whether we like it or not. Activists need to eat too. Activists need to live in a place as well and be able to pay their bills. Um, and so again, that's a example of how ignoring our bodily needs, like needing to rest, needing to have a place to stay in, um, can take us to a very bad path. And I think that's something that happens in activism a lot, in which we see it as if it's not completely free or completely without anything expected on return, it is not pure activism. I think that's bullshit. And that's what a lot of the activists in Latin America says is like, no, because your pleasure also, so there's also pleasure in being able to cover your basic necessities, which I think is something that a lot of sex workers can talk about when there's all of this talk about like, oh, what do you do this, blah, 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 because you don't know what's the pleasure to be not have to worry about money.
I have so much thoughts, and I'm so sure Madeline does too, so I'll let her say stuff as well. But I just want to say, like, I resonate so hard with the being an activist and the martyr. Like, I am so guilty of that for like the first few years of my activism. Oh my God, I would just say yes to everything. I would constantly overextend myself. I still even struggle with that. And one of the gifts of being friends with you, Lilith, is you've really taught me to have more boundaries around realizing that being an activist means like being an activist for myself as well and advocating for my needs.
Oh yeah, like when you just started talking about not doing activism for free, like the alarm bells started going in my head, and I knew they were going in Vixen's head at the same time. Because yeah, you're right. We've had so many conversations around this. I think we had a lot of kōrero around it, and starting the podcast, you know, around having a tipping link for people to tip us, and we discussed it. And I remember Vixen, you saying to me, yeah, we like, because we were both a little funny about it at first, even though we wanted to do it, and you were like, well, no, like, it's about time we made money from this. Like, that's it. It makes sense, you know. We can't just continue to do all of this very like self-sacrificing work, and you know, receiving nothing in return. And we've both at times like worked to the point of burnout. So I think yeah, it's such a valid point, such an important thing to remind ourselves of. And like in situations when me and Vixen have been like in some more like how would I phrase this? More like online, what a lot of people outside of our like activism space or like pole fit civilians would think is quite scandalous. Vixen has like said to me several times that I need to like make sure that I'm not just advocating for everyone else but also myself, which I think kind of lines up with the you shouldn't just be like doing this for free all the time, you know. You shouldn't just be allowing people to like dip into the well of your knowledge constantly without gaining anything in return. Because you're right, like I think like from listening to you, Lilith, and what you described your like work to be and the stuff that you do, like it sounds like we're all in similar positions of like we all sit kind of in that like we are all creatives, and with being a creative comes like all of these different hats that we wear, none of which are necessarily like enough to sustain full-time income. And so you collect all of these different hats, and yes, they are all different loves, but it's not always necessarily the most fruitful career. And so when you are doing such like emotional labor all the time and getting nothing in return, it does actually lead to some pretty severe burnout at times. So yeah, I think yeah, you just hit the nail on the head for me and Vixen and our feelings around that.
Yeah, one thing I want to quickly add to that is something I say to Lilith a lot is like, it's crazy how many people will say to me, civilians will say to me, oh, I'm an ally to sex workers, but they won't want to pay me for the knowledge they get from me. And people feel very entitled to knowledge that one thing I've learned to say to myself when people ask me questions, if they can't Google this question and get an answer, if I should be compensated for this. If you have come to me asking for knowledge that only I specifically have through my years of lived experience, I've gotten through being friends with Lilith, comfortable with saying to people, I would like to be compensated for my time. Because Lilith, I'll let you touch on this. I know that you, through the Latin Cuirs, often get people asking if they can like just come and like watch your events and do academic research on it with no compensation to you. Do you want to touch on that?
Okay, so yes, I really want to talk about that because, funny enough, a few days ago we shared on Latin Cuirs a post made by a anti-racist collective in Veracruz, Mexico called kōrero, and they shared this slide of things that said, "You really need us to share our experience? Hey, our history, our story isn't royalty free. If your scholarships are written with our wounds, then we invoice those wounds." Because that's the thing that also people don't see. That oftentimes when we're speaking about these things, the way that a lot of us end up in activism is because something in our own lives or something about our identity, etc., is in danger, has been hurt, whatever, and we want to do something about it. So oftentimes this knowledge doesn't come from me sitting down and reading a book necessarily. It comes from connecting with other people. It comes from being hurt. It comes from systemic injustices. To what we were saying before, like at the start, I think at the start of most activists' journey, even if you're just a teenager, whatever it may be, we want to go all in, get all the opportunities, quote unquote opportunities, because they're often unpaid. Um, go all in, and at the end of the day, the people who end up benefiting from that are the same people as always. When you go in like that, the only people who are able to remain in that consistently are people who have other types of privileges and support. Like there's a lot of people who in their early 20s maybe they were very into activism, but activism couldn't pay the bills, unfortunately. And not only that, they would get burnt out because in activist circles we do not have the, like, we're not used to holding each other in a way that makes the fight sustainable. It's almost about burning yourself to the ground for it, which sometimes feels like it's the only thing we can do because it's like we look around and everything is shit. So why wouldn't I give it my all? And the answer is because it's not sustainable. You're not going to make a sustainable change out of that. And the people who are able to not have to take a break, not have to step aside for a little bit, are generally people who are able to meet their financial needs in other ways, are often people who are in higher education and thus seen as more legit, even though the knowledge that they got, they did not get it from university. They got it from people in community. And what happens? They get that information, they get that knowledge. They're like, oh my God, you're so smart, you're so cool. Now I'm gonna go put this in my thesis, in my homework, in my talk, and not give you credit. I'm gonna advance my career, earn more money, and you're gonna stay where you are. Oftentimes we think that, or there is this myth that people who put in all of their effort are the people who are going to get rewarded the most. And that is definitely not true, as I'm sure we all know. Um, but I think that, yeah, when we fall into this martyrdom, we fall for that trap of like, oh, I'll give in my 100% and everything will be better. And no, sadly, it's not the same. Yeah, okay. So that was like the explanation. Now, me being angry, you're like, what the fuck? Why do you think you can just come in and just, what I just explained? Some person, um, which I'm not gonna name, but a person messaged us and signed up for our poetry night. I think it was the first one. And it was someone saying that they were doing, I think, a master's research or thesis or something in regards to accessible events for people over I don't know what age in Wellington. And when they signed up, they left that message of like, oh, I'm doing this. It'll be so fun to come. And we responded with an email saying like, oh, we're so glad that you think this is like valuable, but because you will be using this for your research, we don't think it's appropriate for you to just approach us like this because you're getting something out of it. You should at least either try to make a connection with us beforehand. It's very different to come in and be like, how can I help you? I am doing this research. Asko, how can I do this for you? Or just come to our events previous to that. Events are not going to make advance your career in this case, just to get to know us. That is a very different way to approach it. And yeah, that's just one example. We sent that email, kind of being like, yeah, this is not okay. Um, and we left it open to be like, in the last paragraph to be like, we can talk about arrangements, we can talk about, what other ways we can make this happen. And they never responded. And that is a very common thing. Also worth noting, this person is white. And it's this thing of like being so uncomfortable with people being direct, or so uncomfortable with being confronted about stuff. Because I understand it feeling like, oh shit, I fucked up, and like kind of feeling like shame about it, like whatever. But the difference is how you use that to grow. It would be very different if they would have gone back to us and be like, you know what, I'm so sorry, you are 100% right, and try to like see how we can make it work rather than just disappear. Because it might have felt like it was quote unquote too aggressive. Often people say like, oh, why are you so aggressive to people who want to do this? That's going to help our community, blah, blah, blah. Like, it is going to help it, maybe in the sense in which there will be documented research about our needs, but materially, Latin Cuirs needs money today to make our events. We don't need it in 10 years when your thing comes out and then it picks up and then someone does something about it. I think that is a very key difference between working within community and working in theories. People who know all the theories may have the best intentions in the world, but if you're not in community, that's why it doesn't seem as urgent for you to make more tangible changes quicker. You might not be able to change a whole system, but you're able to say, in this case, for example, I would love to donate this money. I would love to contribute. I would love to like have you included in the things or whatever in my thesis.
I think like what I was thinking when you were saying that last bit, again, it would just be so great if people could do some, this sounds pointed, but like do a little bit of like self-work and learn better how to be able to receive critique. Because like, for example, you've experienced this person just completely ghosting you guys and like dropping out of the conversation, and I'm sure you've had other experiences. Me and Vixen have had other experiences where people launch into like complete defensiveness, and it's like, well, like we could actually have a conversation about this, and we could actually, yeah, like this person could have responded to you and sort of said, oh, I absolutely hear that, I'm really sorry, I would love to, like you said, donate some money to help. And then, it can be rectified, or it can be sort of like an agreement can be come to. But a lot of people just, again, maybe especially in Aotearoa, it's this culture of like conflict avoidance, and then just a little bit of tunnel vision, inability to like sort of see outside of one's own experience, or like where you want to sit within your own comfort. But so many people just, they cannot be critiqued. And yeah, the whole like you're so aggressive thing, I mean, me and Vixen both get that as well a lot. We get called hostile, and it's like, well, we're actually starting some conversation with you around like our boundaries and around like a topic that we know a shit ton about, like Vixen said, have so much experience and information and education on these things. And yeah, when people just completely drop out of the conversation, or what's the word for it? There's a word for it, ghosting, but thinking there's a word we've used before for it. It just, they completely skirt having to actually face accountability or like a change in their own actions. Which it's just like, it's such a shame, and it's so hurtful and so frustrating when you're constantly met with that. Yeah, that's my thoughts.
Kia ora. I was thinking a lot about the Polfit community when we were talking about this, and the episode about allyship is not about you, and how I do see, the Polfit community, like in certain aspects, they do really want to be allies and they want to help. But a lot of the time the error is in platforming themselves as the like, oh, we need to bridge the gap between sex workers and Polfit, where it's like the gap was formed in the first place by you guys, and the best way to bridge that gap is not to continuously platform yourselves and to hog the mic. It's to pay the strippers. There are strippers, there are stripper instructors, there are stripper activists out there that have the lived experience that you are trying to put into a little infographic. And I've had lots of people over the years, you know, message me like, hey, Vixen, like I'm writing an article about how to be, you know, do pole fit and be a like good stripper ally. And like, I'm not a stripper myself and I'd love to hear your thoughts. And I'm like, yeah, will I be paid? They're like, no. And I'm like, well, what the fuck are you doing then? Like, just the audacity. And I know that they truly think that they are helping and doing so good by you. But when we dare to, as the Latin Cuirs did, like lay out very clearly what the boundaries are, and in many aspects it's like, I would like some financial contribution for this, they get very like, oh my gosh, they get defensive. And that's how you know the allyship was always performative, because it's not them willing to listen to what your needs are. It's them saying, here's what I'm willing to give, and if you're not okay with it, you're the problem.
Yes, exactly. Like it's a lot about, there's a lot of these, okay, I am ready to right my wrongs, unless it makes me uncomfortable. And I think that's where we can all learn from, because it is uncomfortable to learn that you have been benefited in a way that others haven't. It is, and a lot of people do shield themselves behind it, like, this has made me feel so sad, and I have been crying all day. Like, okay, well, that's something for you to look in yourself about and talk to a therapist, but it's not about me, babe, but we're the ones who are there in that moment. So that also sometimes becomes an excuse to be like, oh no, I don't engage with this group or with this whatever because they treated me really bad. It's like, did they treat you really bad? Or were they just defending themselves? Were they just not doing what you wanted them to do?
And it also reminds me of what we were saying earlier about being so detached from the body. Like when people do feel that whakama, that shame of being confronted with like the way that their entitlement has landed, and they might not have seen it as that wasn't their intention, but here's how it's been received. And instead of sitting through that discomfort and feeling the emotions that come with that, which, I mean, I've been in that position where I've done some stupid shit, someone's called me out on it, and I'm like, oh god, that is so, like, I feel so whakama. But you've got to just sit with those emotions. There's no point in trying to avoid them. And I say this as a Virgo moon who intellectualizes my emotions a lot, when really I just need to be feeling them. And one thing I've really learned in my adult life is, and through decolonizing myself and connecting back to my Māori whakapapa, is how to actually sit with uncomfortable emotions, feel them, and how much you can actually grow as a person from that. And in those situations where, yeah, people do just get straight to the defense, it's not only a disservice to the people that they're trying to be, the community that they're trying to be in allyship with, but it's a disservice to themselves, because they're not allowing themselves the chance to grow. They've blocked this. The body was sending them a signal that was an invitation to look within and to sit with that and to grow from it, but they've ignored that. And I think that's what we were touching on earlier about how detached we are from our bodies. When we're always in the mind, it's like an easy escape. And I say that as a Virgo moon. Fuck, I'm always in my mind, and it's been quite a challenge over the years learning to be in my body more. And it is just, yeah, it's just interesting how those kōreros we've had have just tied back so beautifully to the one about be with your body. It's good for you.
Kia ora.
Yeah, that's exactly, there's a very good way to connect it. Exactly, like your body will tell you, I hate this, I'm gonna vomit from anxiety. But instead of just running away from it in this case, disengaging, it's kind of exploring that. What is this telling me? Is it telling me maybe, I mean, there are people who are dysregulated in the way that they experience certain emotions, well, quote unquote, dysregulated. But the only way that you can actually see that is by listening to your body, thinking about it. And sometimes when it feels like it's too much of like analyzing, just doing something with your body, the amount of times just going for a walk, and I know it sounds very annoying, but going for a walk, touching grass all the time does not fix everything, but it makes it more manageable. And literally all it takes is hanging out with a friend, going to swim, although not right now because Wellington water is full of poop at the moment. For example, that thing that's happening with the water is such a good example of if our territory, physical place where we are, is not okay, we are not going to be okay. There's been so many people, like if you look at social media, talking about how sad it is that they cannot go to the beach or thinking about the animals there, or blah, blah, blah. Or some people who are like, oh, that was my kind of the thing that I did during summer to feel less stressed. And now they cannot do it because it's literally full of shit. So that's like a small example of that. Yeah, I think it's a very good way to connect that importance of the body because sometimes it can feel very abstract. But yeah, in these situations that we have talked about, I think it becomes clearer.
And I think that's what I love so much about what you do as the Latin Queers is that especially your Six Siren workshops that you host, which we'll talk about, and then that'll probably be the last thing we have time to talk about, but you host a lot of Six Siren workshops, and I'm doing one tomorrow night at the time of recording this, a stripper style workshop. But Six Siren, through the workshops I've done with you, it's a huge focus on breath work and body work. And I want to acknowledge that, saying to people like, oh, sit with your emotions. I do feel kind of silly saying that because these are skills we have not been taught specifically on purpose. It's by design. And so I do feel a little bit silly just being like, sit with your fucking emotions. Like, okay, what does that even mean? Like, that's what I've been loving so much about these Six Siren workshops. So Lilith, do you want to talk about your Six Siren workshops and, the specifically the ones you host and how you do focus on breath work and what that means for connecting yourself to your body through your erotic energy? Because erotic doesn't always have to be having sex with someone. Like erotic energy is within you. So talk us through your Six Siren workshops.
Okay, so, well, first of all, sex siren is a category in the ballroom queer culture. And sex siren is about, there's a panel of judges, so you kind of flirt with them or you're sensual for them while you're battling someone else who's also trying to be sensual for them. And it mirrors the experiences of sex workers. And when there's a lot of other sex workers kind of being like, oh, no, talk to me, choose me. It's that kind of that very difficult ability that sex workers have. Like it's very difficult to get to that point in which you're able to do that. And because a lot of the people who started ballroom were Black and Latina sex workers because they were oftentimes trans, and at the time that was kind of like the most accessible jobs for trans people. Um, anyway, that's just a very small explanation of what sex siren is. And the way that I approach it is how my teacher Nina taught it to me. Nina is from Mexico as well, and something that they really like bring up all the time is the breathing. That's why I do it because I have found that it goes back to being connected with your body. When we're nervous or when we are like performing any type of thing, be it a speech or just a few words in front of a lot of people, oftentimes you would ask people after how they felt and they'll say, I blacked out or I don't remember. Or they'll be, the adrenaline will be pumping and they'll maybe stumble on their words. And this is all because it's very normal, like response to your body's giving you. Um, that you're like full of adrenaline, and you're nervous, and people are looking at you. So maybe your way to deal with it is dissociating or whatever it may be. What breathing does is by breathing, it makes you be present in your body because you have to be aware of the breathe in, breathe out. It kind of to center you again to where you are so that not only can you do what you need to do, but also enjoy it. Um, with the breath work, I feel like it is underestimated just because it sounds so boring. But the reality is that in the sex siren workshops, I always start with that. And then later on, when I see people performing things that are not sex siren, they will be like, "Do you see that I use the breath work part?" And I'm like, "Yeah, so proud of you." Because it does help you in your day-to-day life, and that's kind of the approach that I have for the sex siren workshops. yes, we're here for sensuality and sexuality, but I honestly think that there is if you cannot take what you learn in ballroom outside into your life, I don't think that it's what it's meant. It's not working how it is meant to be. Um, it also, well, I'm gonna talk about my workshops in specific. So we start with that breathing, and then what happens if I do that breathing, what looking at someone else? How do I change the intention of breathing? And at first, for people who are new to it, it can be like, it's just breath. Like, what do you mean sending, like changing intention? And so something that I can invite to people who are listening to is to start breathing in and out very quickly and observe what's going to happen. Your heart is going to start to pump faster. You might get dizzy. And that's what happens when you're nervous in front of a crowd. Oxygen is not really entering your brain, even though you're like, you know? But if you do it slowly, you allow oxygen get to your brain. You can think about the things you're doing. You can be more present. And yeah, so a big part of the workshops is that. And then we do a lot of partner work. And it's not partners that people choose. I often am like the one, you and you together, you and you together, just because I am looking for parents that might challenge each other. And by challenging each other, I don't mean like one is going to win and one is going to lose. But sextarian is very confronting in general. But sometimes people can like kind of mute that out because it's a whole crowd and you don't see anyone specific. But when you're in front of that one person, trying to embody sexuality without touching them, without talking, that's when it's like the real challenge, I feel. And that is also something that I would hope teaches my students that even if it's confronting, they can still do it. Not this, but anything that they kind of think about doing. And also, I have other exercises, but all of them are very much about how does sensuality and sexuality look like for you? Because I feel like we all have a script of what sexuality and sensuality looks like. We may imagine like showgirls or just like a cartoon in which someone is very flirty or whatever. But that's how they do it. And that's how the male gaze oftentimes sees sensuality or sexuality. But how do you as a person see it? You might know that if you show your ass or your tits, you're gonna get applause and you're gonna like that. But how do you do that without doing something that comes from you? I don't know if it makes sense. Like it has to come within what you find arousing. An example that I can give is there's people who like to be scratched while they're having sex or when they're masturbating, or they just like the feeling, like just when they're doing stuff, they just like how it feels to be scratching. And they can incorporate that into their sex art. How can you do that in a way that it feels good to you? And the other person just gets to watch that enjoyment, which ultimately I think is what makes a lot of people very magnetic. How much they're in their bodies, how much they're like just enjoying themselves. And you see them, you're like, oh shit, I want to be like that. Or there's people who come into a room and they have something that makes you look at them. That's what I'm trying to help people kind of harness. And not only for your own personal growth, but also because there is true to the fact that there is something that, such as, you know, how there's cultural capital and whatever, it's also sensual capital. The reality is that the systems that we work within are going to limit us. For me, there's a lot of people who listen to my accent and think I'm stupid, for example. Um, but I use that to my advantage in many ways. Kind of pretending that I'm dumb and like, oh my god, I'm dumb and so pretty. How are you gonna help me? And you know, get shit done for that because a lot of people might see it as it might be something that they look down upon. But when you're in a system in which everything is stacked against you in one way or another, you have to find other ways to do it. You have to get outside of that respectability of what a woman should be like or you know, move like. And these are all things that we learn that sex siren ballroom. All of these are things that we learn from sex workers. And that is something that I also try to say a lot in my sex siren workshops. If you do sex siren, you cannot be anti-sex work. because it's because of them that we have all of these skills.
Kia ora. Mine and Madeline's favorite word to say on the podcast.
Literally. I thought it was so interesting how you were talking about teaching sensuality and trying to sort of like help people find their version of that, and a word that was kind of coming to mind for me because I teach stripper style a lot and my dancing is very sensual, but a lot of people really, that's like a desire for a lot of people, is like the sensual embodiment and stuff. And I always say to people, like, just look for something that is like authentically yours, because yeah, there are so many different ways you can do eroticism or sensuality or sexiness or whatever it might be. And if you see what I do and you copy exactly what I do, that's, whilst it might feel great, it might look great, but it might not be you. And so it is interesting to try to like guide people to figure out like what is something that feels right in their body, and like what, I always say this to like lighten the mood a little bit, but I'm like, do something that tickles you. Like find, and I'll give like options and different like, not necessarily dance moves, but like sort of sensual like movements or behaviors that you can try out to figure out which one feels like it fits with you. But it can be really challenging to, like, even when you really like open the floor for people to sort of like play and explore and really like expressly like give permission, a lot of people like really do feel like super uncomfortable with that, and it's nothing wrong on their part. It's just the way, especially like we as women are conditioned to behave so proper. But it is really interesting, and I do find it like, I do find it sort of interesting to witness people like grapple with that a little bit, and because it is a practice and you do have to do it over time to become more like comfortable with that part of yourself, and finding like what feels right. Because I mean, to give an example, like I have done stripper style classes where I've, part of the dance choreography, which is always open to interpretation. I never want students to perfectly copy me, but I've had parts where I've done like fake dildo show, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's like when you're on stage at the strip club or in a private booking and you are doing a toy show. And that is, for very, very like normal people, that is really confronting. It's not for me, but for them it is. And so I'm not expecting everyone to do that with me. I'm like, I want you to find something that feels authentic to you and what you want to express and where you're at right now. Um, and it's interesting, and it is difficult to guide people toward that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that'd be a really beautiful way to end the show. This has been such a fun interview, Lilith. I could talk to you for hours. Like every time we hang out as friends, I leave just feeling like I've learned something new. My heart and my puku are always so full because you always feed me. You literally feed me. You physically and spiritually and mentally nurture me, and like I'm just so grateful that you've come onto the show to share your mana and your wisdom with us. And Madeline, do you have any closing thoughts before we let Lilith say her closing thoughts?
Honestly, I'm just sort of kind of annoyed that I don't live in Wellington right now. Like, I'm just thinking like all of these spaces and these workshops that you guys have been talking about just sound incredible, and I feel, I don't know, I feel I'm living in very kind of bland Tamaki Makaurau. I love my people up here, and I have an amazing like queer and sex worker community. But you guys, just the way you speak about the spaces that you're in and the way that you curate them, um, and just the relationship you two have just sounds gorgeous, and it almost sort of sounds in a way that like Vixen has been quite influenced by you, Lilith, and you've helped her to grow a lot, and then in turn Vixen has like imparted quite a bit of that knowledge on me as well. So I feel like I'm like, what's the word, like indirectly also influenced by you in a sense, which I guess before today we would not have known, because we didn't really know each other. But yeah, it has been absolutely gorgeous to speak with you and to, just have you on the podcast. And hopefully one day I can get my ass down to Wellington and just, somehow find myself in the same room as the two of you. Yeah.
Oh, that would be so fun.
Do you have any closing thoughts, Lilith?
No, I don't have any closing thoughts, but I would like to say that there is a Latin Cuirs Tamaki Makoro team. Obviously, it's people who live there, so I can let you know, Madeline, when there's an event. And also,
Please.
I am planning, hopefully this year, to go up to Tamaki to do a sex hiring workshop.
Well, Lilith, do you want to plug yourself? Where can people find you? How can people support you? Go for gold.
Oh, yes. Okay. So my personal illustration Instagram is at life.of.lilith, life of Lilith. That's where I do a lot of my creative work, mostly illustration, because again, I am an illustrator. Please hire me. And then for Latin Queers, you can find us at Latin Cuirs on Instagram and Facebook. You can send us messages there or share stuff. If you're rude, you're just gonna get blocked. So if you want to waste your time on that, you can do that. And yeah, that's it.
Kia ora. I will plug all of those links in the show note. Cannot recommend booking Lilith for your illustrations enough. Like, when you see her drawing, she is so fucking talented, versatile, gorgeous human. Thank you, Lilith. Tēnā koe for being on the show. Tēnā koe to everyone for listening, and we will see you in the next episode of Stripped and Unscripted. Kia ora.
Bye.
Bye.